I think one of the biggest problems, or maybe one of the biggest conditions for the forestalling that we've had so far, is that this conference, not only do we need it, because it's not like we'll just have this conference and then we'll just move on, because we've done that now. Yeah. But we haven't had these types of conferences before. Yeah. This hasn't been part of the process. Yeah. And so the very fact that this has not been engaged up to this point, I think is one of the primary causes for it being forestalled in the first place. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to try to just shoot through a lot of possible conditions for our difficulty, but then because I have so many of them, the first one I want to say is a lack of appreciation for beauty. Mm. I think is a really deep issue with our forestallment, because in my sitting in on countless lectures, I see the interaction between two individuals, and usually one is a teacher and one's a student. It's not that there's not a teacher and a student, but it's just when we freeze those roles, I think we kill the situation. Mm-hmm. And I mean, how can the situation move and progress and develop and dance around if, you just freeze it? So the student asked a question, and the teacher's job is to show you why you were stupid, Yes, it's pretty good, but this is what it's wrong, and that's why you're still stupid, and get over it. But oftentimes what happened, and, to be honest, initially, that made total sense to me. Mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, and God, look at all these problems everywhere. No matter what you say, there's this issue, and it's wrong, and so on and so on and so on. But over time, people would speak, and it would just be like, wow, do you see the sparkling through there? Do you see the radiance sparkling through in what's being presented? Do you see the beauty that's actually present in what they're saying? It doesn't mean that there isn't any error, because we're like, oh, it's beautiful, and there's no error. So there's clarity or there's confusion, but it's clarity or confusion, which I think is a big confusion. And
that's very clear.
And I think that you have to be able to touch and work with that beauty. If you don't sense that beauty, I don't think you have any ability to work with error at all. And I know that I heard a teacher once, it was even after the 9/11, teachers, how many teachers seem human? Isn't this deal about, we're going to be actually fully human, but then the teachers are all, superheroes of some sort or another with capes and, cool names and everything. But after the 9/11 attacks, and people were angry, and much as has been brought out in countless circles, good people aren't angry. So people were having a lot of trouble. Like, I was so far along, and now the World Trade Center has collapsed, and I'm angry. But the real collapse here is, what about my practice now that I'm angry? I don't know how that's going to work. And the teacher said, if you were angry, that's okay, because I was angry too. That was one of my favorite things he ever said. And there, you could feel it in the room, that a lot of the tension dissolved, disassociation dissolved, the level of truthfulness went up significantly. And then the next week, we had to modify it. We met again the following week, and he's like, now, I don't want you to misunderstand how I was angry. And I thought, well, what? Couldn't you just be angry? No. He said, I wasn't angry at the terrorists, I was angry at human delusion. And we all kind of went, oh, right. And of course, I was angry at the terrorists. This guy was angry at human delusion, and that makes it okay. And luckily, I think there's a natural intelligence that if we just stay open to it, it will kick us a little bit out of these states. Because right away, something just seemed a little kind of fishy smelling there. I couldn't articulate exactly what it was, so I just stayed and just smelt that fishiness for a couple of days and looked at anger a little bit. And I realized that whenever we're angry at something, and that the object that we're angry at is always, as part of its activity, justifying the anger so that it will continue. If you justify the object of the anger will never dissipate. And that's what we've done. And this is like, how are we ever going to be free from anger? If you're angry at human delusion, look around. What are we going to do? And although there's a pathological aspect to what I'm going to say next, what struck me is that there has to be a love affair with human delusion. To have any effectiveness, any efficacy at all, there has to be a love affair with human delusion. But this total love and this total acceptance is not justification or condoning or even propagating particularly. So I think that that's a big breakdown in this whole issue, is this level of appreciation of beauty. And that's how it first appeared to me, and it rambles on. Then I read Ken, and of course he said, everybody's right. And I thought, see, that's beautiful. And that was kind of something that I was just intuiting prior to that. And so I think that that's a big problem, and that's why integral is so needed, because that's one of the fundamental things that it's doing. Mm-hmm. Even if we look at error, when we spot error, it almost seems like, and again, error has its own beauty, its own pathology, but when you spot error, often our tendency is then to be arrogant and to distance ourselves, and now not to be in communication, not to have any relationship, and now we know why I'm right. But then when we appreciate beauty, and I'm just talking about the feel of these things, when we appreciate beauty, what's the feeling? And there's oftentimes a feeling of a little bit more dissolution, a little bit more opening up. Now, I don't want to go to one extreme or the other, but I'm just saying that's why the beauty is so important. And then to move on from there, everybody knows the Matrix, right? Because even though there has been this forestalling, there's tremendous interest. Look at how much interest there was in the Matrix. And we shot everybody in the Matrix, but still we were so interested in it, partially because we were shooting everybody. But in the Matrix, there's the issue of the spoon. The kid is bending the spoon. And they got to that issue, and I was like, okay, this is a fulcrum in this movie right now. How are they going to navigate this? And he's like, well, you have to, I can't remember the exact question, something like, well, you have to actually understand the spoon. He's like, well, what is there to actually understand about the spoon? And I was praying, I don't know if I'm praying, but I was like, please, do not say there's no spoon. No. Please, do not say there's no spoon. And the kid goes, that there's no spoon. And in the audience, now we're laughing, but at the time there was this collective like, oh. There was this collective groan, and I think that's the force of that groan is part of the forestalling of this process. Mm-hmm. Because we take that there's no spoon as a negation and as a reduction, and in the process, the spoon doesn't bend. But see, I mean, I'm kind of extending the metaphor here, but the spoon's bending. Yeah. What do you mean there's no spoon? Look at all the movement. Mm. So the no spoon is actually the redemption of the spoon. And this relates with what you were saying before about these states. What does that mean for these states? What does that mean in terms of our lives for these states? And we don't have a fundamental appreciation of what would that mean for us, but also what would that mean for teachers. So what happens is, and I don't think the teachers actually oftentimes have a very good understanding of what this means for them or anybody else either. And that doesn't mean we should persecute them, because we don't understand it either. So we're all in the same situation together, generally speaking. So the teacher doesn't tell us up front that they're a human being, so we assume that they're a superhero. Then the minute that they're human, we feel so disappointed, so let down. How could you be human? But actually, oftentimes the teacher's like, how could I be human? And so it's a big problem, and the teacher tries to find a way to make themselves not human, and we get angry, we see through it that they actually are human. And if we would recognize more of this process as it evolves and more of what it means to actually be human, I think that we would, because we have the same reaction with ourselves. I'm human? There was this thing that happened. There's still humanity taking place? What's the deal? So if we had more of an understanding of that process, I don't think we'd be so disappointed with ourselves. I don't think we'd be so disappointed with teachers. I don't think teachers would be so disappointed with themselves or with their students. Student has some kind of state, and the teacher's like, yes, like, hot damn, we have something here. And then students still manifest humanity. It's like, oh. So I think those are just like a brief tour of some of our issues.
And let me, one quick thing, and we can come back to this, but I'd like you to be thinking about, when we discuss this issue, to differentiate what would happen if there was more appreciation of this radiant beauty that is always present in these occasions, and becoming more human, allowing ourselves to be more human, versus going too far and the sort of the insipid spiritual friend side of the street that we've gotten into, and maybe you could differentiate that a little bit later. So okay. if you'll hold on to that thought.